Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and thank you very much for being with us on the program tonight. Rita Dunaway joins us, a constitutional attorney, the author of Restoring America's Soul, Advancing Timeless Conservative Principles in a Wayward Culture. Also co-host, by the way, of the weekly radio program Crossroads, where faith and culture meet. Rita, thank you for joining us this evening.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me tonight.
Absolutely. You have been taking a look at the whole notion of citizens having the power to reform government. A lot of people, I think, would probably take exception with that in theory, sure, but in fact, that we're powerless. What would be your response to such seeming cynicism?
Well, first of all, I would say I can certainly understand that frustrated feeling. And I think the reason why people feel that way is because we're looking at Washington. You know, we go to the polls, we vote dutifully for the candidates that we think are best suited to bring reformations that we need, you know, in the government. And then they get there and nothing really seems to change. And so that causes a lot of frustration. But I would submit that the problem is we need to look outside the Beltway for real reform. We need to look to the states because that's where real power does reside that can be used to bring about meaningful reforms rather than just more of the status quo.
Well, certainly at some levels that's absolutely true. At others, I guess probably not so much. For example, there is the power of a referendum and initiative, and I guess in most states, but not at the federal level.
Mm-hmm. Well, the power that I'm referring to actually is the power found in Article 5, which gives the states collectively the power to bypass Congress and the whole mess we have going on in Washington in order to propose amendments to the Constitution that can bring about those structural repairs that we need at this point for our federal system.
In other words, the proposed Article 5 Constitutional Convention of the States.
Yeah, a convention of the states to propose amendments, and specifically amendments that would limit federal power, impose fiscal restraints on Washington, and set term limits for federal officials. That's what the Convention of States project is all about, and I submit that's the only way we're ever going to see real change.
I would suspect that you're correct insofar, if nothing else, the fact that many of the needed constitutional amendments could not be adopted by the method that we have used so far in the 27 amendments that we've made to the Constitution, and that is there are two means in the Constitution of starting the ball rolling. One would be a two-thirds vote of the House and two-thirds vote of the Senate, and followed by ratification by three-quarters of the states. The other is this constitutional convention approach, which has not been used, followed again by ratification of three-quarters of the states. Certainly, the types of things you just talked about, for example, term limits on members of Congress, some of the other proposed amendments I've heard, for example, no budget, no congressional pay. Every law passed by Congress must apply equally to the people and to the members of Congress. So there'd be no more sweetheart health care programs for members of Congress and the rest of us get Obamacare, this sort of thing. Those are the very types of things that would never, ever, ever get through Congress. So we, in a way, I suppose, we have backed up a number of changes that need to be made, and this is the only foreseeable path forward.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And first of all, I want to applaud you on how well you know your Article 5. You described the two processes perfectly. And I think it's important, as you just pointed out, for everyone to understand that regardless of who does the proposing of the amendments, whether it's Congress or a convention of the states, amendments always have to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. That's 38 states. So there's a lot of protection there that people should be aware of. But the bigger point that you're making is right on too, and that is that we cannot expect federal officials to limit their own power. It is just not in human nature to do that. We've been looking for it for decades and decades. It hasn't happened. And the fact is the Founding Fathers knew that that wasn't going to happen. And that is exactly why they provided this check and balance in Article 5 and gave it to the states to use for exactly the kind of situation we're in right now.
I wonder why it is that this has never been used before, at least certainly not for the 27 which have in fact been ratified.
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't see a lot of federal government limiting amendments since the Bill of Rights, and the amendments that we do have, this is another important point for people to think about, because some people will say, well, adding amendments to the Constitution isn't going to do any good because those amendments will just be ignored. Well, no, the fact is, if you look at the amendments we have, those 27, and particularly the more recent of those, they're worded in modern, commonly used language, and they work quite well. They accomplish what they set out to accomplish. And it's time for the American people to take a look at doing this and get involved in having the states use their check and balance to restrain Washington.
Now, there are, of course, two things to note about that 3/4 of the states, or 38 states, needed for ratification. One would be, as you correctly point out, that it's going to be pretty hard to get anything wild and wacky through 38 state legislatures. The other side of the coin is it would only take 13 states to block any of the reforms you just outlined, and I somehow find it not at all hard to believe that you could find 13 states that would so do. I mean, I'll grant you that the purpose of the process envisioned by the founders was to make this a process that could not simply be passed by the whims of the moment. It would require a substantial viewpoint on the part of the public as reflected in the various states. The other side of the coin is that I think that you could certainly find 13 states that would, at the very least, be in play for blocking these.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And particularly for conservatives, they're usually the ones who say things like, we don't want to lose the Second Amendment. If we have a convention of states, we're going to lose the Second Amendment. Well, we have to get real about that. If we can't think of 13 states that would block some crazy attempt to repeal the Second Amendment, then, we've already lost our country, is the truth of it. I just don't believe we're there. I could easily name 13 states that aren't going to let anything crazy like that happen. But, think about what we could accomplish if we use this power. And the fact that we've never used it almost explains why we're in the situation we're in now, because it is one of the checks and balances provided by the founders. It was meant to be used.
This is the 232nd Constitution Day, and we're talking about using that process with Rita Dunaway, constitutional attorney. And we go to a call from Linda in Champaign, Illinois. Linda, thank you for joining us tonight, and good evening, and welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you to our guest. And I've said this before, and incidentally, this is my birthday, and it's Constitution Day, and I'm kind of proud of it.
Outstanding. You and the Constitution both.
Anyway, but that's not why I called. There have been amendments to the Constitution that managed to get passed, and I feel like the public were better informed back then, way more than even they are now, and I worry. I think that so many people are so well informed that very easily things could get passed, even 3/4 of the states that some of us would be amazed at. Now,
well, of course, we're not talking here about referenda. We're talking, in the most case, I suppose, Rita Dunaway, about votes by the state legislature and whatever else you may say about the legislature. I think that they are more or less aware of the issues of the day.
Yeah, that's the more likely ratification procedure to be used once amendments are proposed at a convention of states. But look, I think, Linda, and by the way, happy birthday, Linda. What an honor to share a birthday with the Constitution. But you're bringing up another point that I think is important for people to understand, and that is that a convention of the states would not be just some wide open gathering where the states send people and they just go sit around and talk about how they'd like to amend the Constitution. It starts when 2/3 of the states, that's 34 states, pass resolutions through their state legislatures applying to Congress to hold this convention for amendments on a particular topic. So that's the important point. They have to agree from the beginning about what will be the agenda for the discussion and ultimate proposal of constitutional amendments. And under the Convention of States project application, those resolutions are very clearly limited to amendments that would do three things: impose fiscal restraints on Washington, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and set term limits for federal officials. And frankly, when I think through those, I can't really think of any crazy amendment proposals that I think would come up under those limitations.
Rita Dunaway, our guest constitutional attorney, who has written an item at scream.org, Citizens, You Do Have the Power to Reform Government, and in it she puts forward the arguments that we have noted tonight regarding this Article 5 Constitutional Convention. As we take another call for you, where do we stand now? How many states have ratified of the necessary 34 to call for Congress to do this?
Well, we have passed our resolution with the leadership of our grassroots teams all over the country. We've passed so far in 15 states. So we're nearing that halfway mark, and I do look for 2020 to be a big year legislatively, but we need everyone to get involved. Contact your state legislators. Tell them you support this and that you want real reform to happen, and it has to come from the states. 1-866-50-JIMBO. We go to Sharon in Crane, Missouri. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Jim, and hello to your guest. I am all for a constitutional convention, and one of the things that I would like to see put into it is the IRS can audit any individual citizen in this country to make sure that they are not taking deductions that are illegal and that they are paying their taxes appropriately. I would like to see a law passed that we have to do a forensic audit of the government of the United States of America so that people know where their money is being spent, because billions of dollars are going down Alice's rabbit hole every single year. And because of that, we don't really know how much money we have in this government, where it's being spent, and there is billions of dollars that nobody can account for. And if no one believes that, go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and see what happened when they took their case to court. Thank you.
All right. Comments on Sharon's thoughts, Rita?
Well, I think auditing what the federal government's doing with its money certainly sounds like a good idea, and that would be something that would fall under our application's inclusion of the topic imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government. That's what we want to do. Obviously, we're at, over $22 trillion in debt. That's crazy. Something needs to be done, and it's not going to happen within the Beltway.
No, it will not. One thing we should note, by the way, the Constitution is quite clear. If, in fact, 34 states do request this constitutional convention, Congress shall call such a convention. They don't have a choice. That's
right. They don't have a choice. It is a very clear mandatory duty under Article 5 itself. Another point that some listeners may not realize is that in order to get to that 34 state threshold, it's only the state legislature that has to act. These resolutions do not need to be signed by the governor, and even the president of the United States has nothing to do with this. It only concerns the state legislatures getting to that 34 number, and then Congress is required to set the date and time for the initial meeting.
All right. Very good. Thank you so much for being with us on the program tonight. Rita Dunaway is a constitutional attorney, author of Restoring America's Soul, Advancing Timeless Conservative Principles in a Wayward Culture. And the article she wrote about citizen power is at stream.org. I'm Jim Bohannon, and this is Westwood One.
Go to conventionofstates.com, press the button, sign the petition. More importantly, get 10 of your friends to do the same. When you sign the petition, then that sends a letter to your state legislator. You go on the list in their district as a supporter. We deliver those lists to the state legislators. It means something to them.